come from the architecture office called BIG, or simply Big. I'm actually here with my two colleagues, Andreas Petersen and Jakob Henke, that are sitting here. So if you come to the opening of the warehouse 421 tonight, you can get a chance to say hello to all of us. Basically, we are an architecture office. This is our office in Copenhagen. It's located inside a former Carlsberg factory where they used to make the least interesting part of the beer, the bottle cap. And apparently you need sort of 15-meter ceilings to make tiny little things. But it's also a great space for architecture. We make buildings. We also make haircuts. And the way we look at the city is that we try to think of cities not as sort of accumulations of pretty facades or like sculptural volumes, but as man-made ecosystems. So the idea is that we trace the flow of resources, not just of people and cars through our cities, as entire man-made ecosystems. And one of the sort of ideas we've developed is this idea that the whole notion of sustainability doesn't necessarily have to mean that we have to sacrifice quality of life in order to afford being sustainable. There are examples of how life can be more enjoyable through sustainability. We designed the Danish pavilion at the Shanghai World Expo as a condensation of Danish city life, complete with the blue bicycle lanes of Copenhagen. 20 years ago, we got the city bikes, where for free you can get a bicycle and move around the city. So visitors could sort of experience the thrill of bicycling through the city instead of being stuck in a traffic jam. You could also bicycle through the exhibition, making it the perfect museum for impatient people, because you could do everything in 5 minutes. And then our first project in Copenhagen was the Copenhagen Harbor Bath that sort of extends the life of the city into the water. And we thought, why don't we bring this experience to Shanghai to allow the visitors to experience how clean, if not how cold, Danish harbor water is. And then we thought it doesn't really make any sense if we do all these things, but if the Chinese don't come, they won't experience it. So we thought we needed some kind of a bait. And we started looking at different similarities between Denmark and China. And we found that in the Chinese public school curriculum, they have 3 fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, one of them being the story of the Little Mermaid, the national symbol of Denmark. So we thought, like, why don't we sort of bring the mermaid to China for 6 months? When the Danish Nationalist Party heard about this, they freaked out and they tried to pass a law against moving the mermaid. So I had to go to Danish Parliament and argue her case. And as you can see, finally we got her. Then we had to get her through Chinese customs. And finally we got her into the pavilion. So essentially this was, now that she was gone in Copenhagen, we thought as a sort of cultural exchange, as a replacement, we invited the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei to make an art installation. And what he did is that he installed a Chinese surveillance camera in the pavilion. The camera was linked to a giant screen he mounted in the waters in Copenhagen where the mermaid normally sits, so that tourists who would go in vain could see that she was okay. She was just 12 hours away. But also it became almost like a loophole in the Great Firewall of China, as it was the only uncensored live TV feed from China to the rest of the world for 6 months. So this was sort of the first time we started working with this idea of trying to use architecture and design as a way to make sustainable cities and buildings more enjoyable. Also, whenever we start a new project, we begin by sort of educating ourselves in what is this project all about, what is the biggest problem we need to solve? What is the greatest potential we can unleash? And then we sort of identify what are the key criteria, what is the key knowledge, what is the key information we need to find in order to make well-informed design decisions. And just to give you some examples of, anyway, you can say that architecture in that sense is like turning all the practicalities of everyday life into something poetical. An example is of what are the forces that can shape a building. We were invited to do a sports hall at my old high school, and basically we had two options. Either we could place it on the football fields, but since football is the national sport of Denmark, it would be political suicide to propose to put the hall there. So we proposed to put it inside the courtyard where the students have their free time. So of course we didn't want to like fill up the courtyard, so we tried to dig down the sports hall. But digging is expensive. The hall is going to be a there's an earthquake. The hall is going to be a handball hall, and the rules of handball dictate that you need 4.5 meters clear on the perimeter and 8 meters clear in the middle. So as a way to minimize the excavation, and also because we got the commission from my old math teacher, we based the curvature of the roof on the mathematical formula for a ballistic arch. So the sort of gracious curvature of the glulam beams is not designed by us, but it's essentially the shape that happens once you trace the natural arc of a thrown handball. As a result, up in the courtyard, you get an imprint. Almost like you can see the geometry of the game bulges out and creates this big social carpet. It's become like a very popular place for the kids to hang out. Actually, the janitor in my high school believes that he can scientifically prove that we have tripled the use of the courtyard, because he had to put up 3 times as many waste baskets because they use it much more now. So essentially you get a form of poetry out of the practicalities of handball. Another example in the opposite end is a project we have designed in Elsinore. It's basically right next to Hamlet's castle, Kronborg. Kronborg used to be the home of the Danish Maritime Museum. Then it became UNESCO World Heritage, and they had to throw it out because it wasn't there when Hamlet was around. So the suggestion was to put it in a decommissioned dry dock where they used to build ships. But there was a dilemma, because on one hand, UNESCO said we couldn't stick as much as a meter out of the ground to not block the view of the castle. On the other hand, the museum had wanted some kind of an architectural masterpiece to attract visitors. So we got this idea of essentially turning the dock inside out, using the museum to preserve the dock. Suddenly all we have to do is design 3 bridges. One bridge that stops the water from coming in, one bridge that connects to the castle, and then one that gradually takes you down into the museum. And we could actually build the bridges in a shipyard, and then we could sail it to the dock and lift them into place exactly the way that you build ships. So when you visit the museum, you have this sort of gradual descent that takes you into a series of spaces. Some of them are intimate in proportion, some of them are vast, like cargo bays. And the general architecture is really happening from the sort of encounter between the lightness of the glass and the steel, and the heaviness and the weight and the history of the concrete. You can see the traces on the concrete walls of the effort of building ships. You have an auditorium where the seats for the grown-ups, if you like, continue underneath the stage and become an auditorium for children. And basically, the space outside has turned out to be sort of this new public space for the city of Elsinore. Not only do you have events inside the auditorium, but also the dock itself, because of the hard walls and the open ceiling has really amazing acoustics. So this like piece of industrial relic has now become a really popular performance space in Elsinore. And I really like the sort of the coexistence of the history of the heritage above the horizon, and then this like contemporary new world below the horizon. This is this sort of inverse Titanic moment. So once we have identified what a project is all about, we don't necessarily have that's basically like we know what the question is, but we don't yet know what the answer is. And to find the answer, we have to make a lot of different tests. So we build a lot of different models where we experiment with ideas. And just to give you an impression of what such a process could look like, we are building a museum in this beautiful valley in Switzerland. It's the Vallée du Choux. It's the cradle of Swiss watchmaking. And we were basically asked to make a museum about the history of watchmaking, and we were asked to place it next to this historical building where 150 years ago the brothers, the watchmakers Audemars and Piguet started their company. Their headquarters is next to it. And our first thought was that this new building, we would just sort of place it between the existing buildings, almost like as a piece of connective tissue. But the more we looked at it, the more it felt like some annoying alien like butting in between two friends. So we thought maybe we should try to stay low, try to be in the back part of the valley. There was a museum program where you had a lot of different exhibition spaces. We thought, why don't we make a village of small pavilions interconnected? Maybe they could be connected like a trajectory. So you go through the different spaces and then you end up going up to the historical workshop where the company was founded. So we tried different variations of that idea. Then we thought like maybe we should just really stay underneath the radar in the landscape in one form or the other. And you can see sort of gradually the sort of design process sort of spins out of control and takes on a life on its own. So what we ended up doing was we took the program of the museum, of the different galleries, turned it into this sort of linear narrative that they dictated, and then we coiled up this narrative into a spiral that we could place on the site. There's like a journey that takes you into some bigger galleries in the middle and then sort of out again up to the workshop. Then we sort of follow the terrain to bring daylight and air into the exhibitions. As you walk around, you have daylight, you have views of the surrounding valley and the mountains. And as you arrive through the historical headquarters, then you go in, and the first thing that happens is that the view opens up and you get a view of the valley. Certain spaces have very controlled conditions. Sometimes you walk through the workshops where the watchmakers sit facing north, as they've done for 150 years, repairing the watches, overlooking the mountains. Towards the heart of it, you have this big open space. And actually, you might notice that there are absolutely no columns. And that's because glass is actually stronger than steel when it comes to compression. But it's very bad at taking tension. And when there's an earthquake, it tends to buckle. But because the glass is curving, the rigidity that comes from the curving geometry makes it possible to withstand an earthquake. And as a result, you can really bring the valley deep into the experience. And then finally, you ascend to the attic with the historical workshop. So when you present the project like this, it almost feels like inevitable, like, of course, the museum wants to look like this. But you just forget that you actually had to kiss like 50 frogs before you found something that was promising. As a result, we built incredibly many models in the office. Sometimes we build them so big that we can use Lego as a way of building. Actually, if you walk around our studio, There's like Lego bricks everywhere. Even the signage in our office is made out of Lego. So when we got approached by Lego to hear if we wanted to help them create a building that would look at human culture through the eyes of Lego, we were sort of incredibly excited. We went completely bananas. This is what the process typically looked like. You know, you can see all kinds of models at different scales, all kinds of evidence on the walls, drawings, different tests, diagrams. And what it ended up with was that we are currently building this Lego house in the hometown of Lego in Denmark. It's created like a cloud of interlocking galleries that cover this big public space on the ground that is actually open to the public. It's almost like a new town square surrounded by different things, including a Lego store. And then from here you can ascend up to a series of galleries that sort of communicate the various sort of developmental aspects of Lego. And I think most importantly, the entire roofscape is conceived as a landscape of interconnected playgrounds where anyone living in the city or just passing by is welcome to actually mountain climb and go up and enjoy the different aspects of play. So we broke ground. Of course, it's built on a foundation of Lego bricks out of concrete. This is one of my favorite photos. It's me and all of the richest people in Denmark. It's like, I think it says something about a country when the richest man is the man who makes Lego. And you can also sort of build a small, I think it's one of the few Lego boxes where we didn't have to change the architecture in order to make it buildable out of Lego. Another sort of aspect that can inform architecture is the different ingredients that you put together. Even though the separate ingredients might be very normal, like where people live or where people work or where they go to kindergarten or where they buy their stuff. But once you put it together, you can actually create some kind of added value. We did a very big project in Copenhagen where there's shops and offices that we place close to the customers on the ground. Then we place townhouses, like residential buildings, on top. But because a residential floor plate is more slender than a commercial one, we get space for little gardens. Then we add a layer of classic apartments and another layer of townhouses. The master plan asks for a shortcut through the building, so we create two squares and a short circuit. And then we start optimizing the different aspects for daylight, views, sunshine, etc. And in the end, we have this sort of distorted 8. It's a very lively auditorium. And basically, it's located at the edge of the city of Copenhagen. Behind this lake, you have cattle walking around. And then as you sort of approach, you see that not only does this thinking allow you to optimize the conditions for the individual programs, the townhouses, here you can see a kindergarten with places where people live on top of it. But it actually also invites social life, the possibility of meeting your neighbors or playing with the kid next door to actually invade the three-dimensional space of the city block. So you see like the offices below in the shade, the homes up in the sunshine. And essentially, it isn't just like a good-looking facade or a three-dimensional sculpture. It's a three-dimensional urban condition. All of the amenities are connected in this social atrium where the 8 house crosses itself, connecting the ground to the roof. But I think what's special is that you have these situations that like this looks like a typical sort of suburban townhouse neighborhood, but it's happening on the 10th floor. These two girls are neighbors. They live on the 11th and the 9th floor, but they can actually just walk down and play with each other. So it actually turns the building into like this sort of socially condensed urban condition. And of course, like certain ideas are developed in certain places, but even ideas that work in one place, they can actually migrate to another place, and there they're going to transform to something else. One example is that a New York developer, the Dursts, they saw our project for the 8 House, and they wanted something of a similar nature in New York. This building is currently under construction, and it's basically conceived as a hybrid between a Manhattan skyscraper. It has the density of a Manhattan skyscraper, but it has the communal space of a Copenhagen courtyard. So essentially, it becomes a hybrid that we've called a court scraper. So it has this like rather striking silhouette. On one corner, it's the height of a handrail. In the other corner, it's the height of a high-rise. This is what it looks like today. It's the first people are going to move in March next year. Actually, the other day I took this photo landing in Newark Airport. I promise you, there's no Photoshop. It makes the architect very happy when he sees something like this. This sort of a rather striking new silhouette on the skyline. Another part of the New York skyline that we're currently sort of working with is all the way downtown at the World Trade Center. We're designing the last tower at the World Trade Center site. And it's interesting, as you can see here, you have basically the sort of city blocks of Tribeca, and then suddenly they meet the skyscrapers of what used to be the financial district. And we thought, what if we could imagine a building that would be equally at home among the glass towers of the World Trade Center, as well as the city blocks of Tribeca, or essentially almost like this sort of Janus face of two opposing identities merging into one. Also, it's no longer the financial district. This building is going to contain, like huge floor plates for film studios and TV studios, big, large open spaces for like newsrooms and collaborative floor plates, and then sort of more classic executive offices. So basically, we just took the idea of sort of taking each of these buildings tailored to their specific programs, stacking them on top of each other to form a single silhouette. From the World Trade Center site and the memorial, it looks like this sort of tall and slender tower out of glass, except you can see it's gradually getting wider and wider towards the top. But from the other side, from Tribeca, it looks like almost like a vertical bundle or a stack of individual city blocks with these huge roof terraces where the work life can actually extend to the outside. If you're working on the 60th floor, you can actually go out and take a phone call in a beautiful park. Also, it's the home of several television stations and newspapers, and the idea is that and publishing houses, that the content that is being manufactured inside the building can sort of rise out of the ground, and then as the building starts getting wider and wider towards the top, it actually becomes almost like a sixth facade, like a downward-facing way of communicating what's happening inside and expressing it to the outside. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting about being an architect is that, like any other public art, when we work on something, we have all kinds of intentions. But once we build the building and it's complete and it's out there, it belongs to the city and it belongs to the citizens. So anybody else's interpretation is as good as ours. And when we presented this project 6 months ago, of course we were anxious to see how it would be received, because it's a site that has a lot of history and a lot of symbolism attached to it. And everybody knows that architects get a lot of negative feedback, but once in a while you get a letter that, like the one I got from a man who was the brother of one of the firefighters who gave his life as one of the first responders at the incidents of 9/11. And he just wrote me sort of Dear Mr. Ingels, I just want to tell you that I like the new design for the World Trade Center Tower very much, because I see it as a as a stairway to heaven, sort of commemorating the heroic stair climb of the firefighters in 9/11 and the ascension of the innocent souls that died in 9/11. And to him, he liked the idea that not just the memorial with the two fountains, but actually the skyline of the city could be a way of commemorating the heroism and sacrifice of 9/11. And I had to tell him that we never thought about it like this, but now when I see it, I think it's maybe an even better interpretation than anything that made us design it. So the World Trade Center Tower is essentially 300,000 square meters of workspace. On the other end, on the other coast of the United States, we're working for Google right now. And Google has been sort of become quite famous for their workspace, this sort of colorful, playful, active, healthy environment. And they've almost become the standard for Silicon Valley and the tech industry. But where they started, like roughly 20 years ago, as sort of a startup, now they've become sort of a global behemoth of more than 30,000 colleagues or Googlers. They're also starting to venture from the digital realm into the physical realm. They're involved in the driverless cars, Google Cardboard, different kinds of hardware. And also when you look at the city of Mountain View, these are the sort of downtown Mountain View. Basically in terms of size, downtown Mountain View is roughly the same size as the Google campus. And this is kind of true for all of Silicon Valley, that for each of the towns, there's an equivalent technology headquarters. So these buildings can't just be sort of hermetic office buildings. They have to somehow open up to the surroundings. And our basic proposition is to eliminate the parking and turn it into park, to eliminate the sort of the boxy buildings and create a transparent canopy that filters daylight, lets some of the daylight through, harvests other parts of the daylight for electricity, regulates the temperature, air quality, etc. And then underneath this canopy, we create a village of workspaces that are much more free to sort of adapt and transform over time. We're lifting up the sort of the edges of the glass skirt, allowing people to pass by the buildings. The workspaces become these sort of open, interlocking platforms for collaboration, where we try to dissolve the idea of the vertical stack of horizontal floors, so that you can actually walk from one floor to the next in a sort of ascending spiral. So you never have to necessarily take the elevator. Everybody's potentially on one floor. And then the activities from within spill out and help create an animated public realm around it. So essentially trying to sort of create this sort of prototype of a new kind of sort of very lively, mixed, technology-enabled neighborhood. One aspect that I think is often true in our work is that it comes by combining things that seem mutually exclusive. For instance, we're doing a museum in a sculpture park in Norway, and we were allowed to put the museum anywhere we wanted. And our suggestion was, you have sculptures on one side of the river, you have sculptures on the other side of the river. We said, like, why don't we actually turn the museum into a part of the park, like a bridge? So you walk through the sculpture park, you enter into the museum, you have the skylit sculpture galleries, where the skylights flip 90 degrees and become sort of panoramic windows overlooking the historical mill over the river. And then you continue your journey through the sculpture park. So you can almost see it as a hybrid between a museum, a bridge, and a sculpture, if you like. It's almost like one of the biggest sculptures in the sculpture park. From certain angles, you might not even suspect that it's a building. It really looks like sort of just another work of art. And this sort of character of bringing things together that you normally don't find together is a quite sort of a good driver for architectural innovation. We're doing a building in the Bahamas in a place called Albany, where the weather is incredibly nice. So we're proposing to have like really big balconies, 5-meter deep balconies for all the homes. And then the client asked if we could make sure that there was going to be a small swimming pool on each balcony. And we thought sort of instead of like stepping up into a bathtub, you want to step down into the pool. So we got this idea of basically allowing the balcony to sag in the middle, always placing the pool above the partition wall of the 2 units below. So the strength of the 4-meter tall wall becomes a giant beam. So as they joined, it forms this sort of almost looks like a beehive or a honeycomb of interlocking elements. You can see the terrace also gets this porch-like feeling of a sloping roof that makes it feel more like a small little house, but nested together with all the neighbors. And from the outside, the handrail is made out of aquarium glass. So it's 25 meters long, one single piece of glass that is actually the facade of the building. So there's no skinny dipping in this building because it would be against the law. But essentially together, you can say like this like composition of the quality of each of the homes suddenly creates this architecture on its own. We didn't have to design a facade; it was already created. It's currently under construction in the Bahamas, and we filled the water into the first pool as a test recently, and it seems to be working really nicely. So essentially, like when you take these like weird elements and bring them together, things happen. Maybe before we get to Abu Dhabi, like you can say like quite often another ingredient that really has an impact on a design is the city that is already there and how you react to it. And you say like when we're talking about infrastructure, we all know that infrastructure can have a negative impact on a city. You know, like the way a highway comes in and cast shadows on the surrounding city. This is Granville Bridge in downtown Vancouver. It turns into a triangle and slices up the site into almost like useless elements. And we got asked to see if we could turn this into a neighborhood. And we started sort of looking at different setbacks from the streets, setbacks from the bridges. Then there's a 30-meter setback because the city wants to make sure that nobody looks straight into the traffic of the bridge. Then there's a park where we're not supposed to cast any shadows. And finally, we're left with only 600 square meters of buildable space, almost too small to make any sense. So then we got this idea that if the 30-meter setback has to do with a minimum distance from the home to the car, once we get 30 meters up in the air, we can sort of grow the building back. So imagine as you drive over Granville Bridge, it's almost as if someone is pulling a curtain aside, sort of welcome to Vancouver. It almost looks like a genie coming out of a bottle and then sort of growing, or like a piece of weed that grows between the cracks in the asphalt and starts blossoming once it gets air and light. It's very parallel to the conditions that shaped the Flatiron Building in New York, which is like one of the first skyscrapers and one of the most famous ones. And it's basically the intersection of the street grid of Manhattan with the diagonal of Broadway that left over a silly little triangle that couldn't be developed until you had steel structure and elevators, and the real estate value made it feasible. And now it's the namesake of a whole neighborhood. We're just taking that idea one step further. And not only is the tower itself a way of densifying this part of town, but also we can do shops, offices, restaurants between the bridges, and we're trying to sort of turn the underside of the bridge into an asset. It rains quite a lot in Vancouver, so it's almost like an urban umbrella. But also we're working with some local artists. Vancouver has a very lively art photography scene. So together with Rodney Graham, we are working on the idea of turning the underside of the bridge into sort of Sistines Chapel of street art, you know, like an art gallery turned on its head, making it a sort of much more lively part of the city. It's currently under construction and opens in 2 years. So that brings us to Abu Dhabi, where in a similar fashion, this sort of informed by infrastructure, in this case, the infrastructure of the port, the harbor industry, the fishing industry, and trying to see if we could start looking at turning this part of town into a neighborhood with a different kind of character. And you could say a lot of the development that has happened in this region, maybe especially in your sort of neighbor state, Dubai, has been this idea that you know, where nothing is, everything is possible. In the middle of the sand, you can create an oasis. In the middle of the water, you can create an archipelago. And that has really created this sort of idea of a city based on the fantastical. However, a lot of the heritage, and not just the ancient heritage, but the more recent industrial heritage, has sometimes been lost, and some of the charm and character that comes with evolving the city rather than starting from scratch or pressing reset every time has sometimes been lost. And together with the Shakers Foundation, we've tried to sort of look at the whole neighborhood, look at the different you know, beautiful configurations and different characters you currently have. Like on one hand, you have like the sort of humongous scale of the big ships of the international shipping industry. On the other hand, you have the small charm of the local fishing boats, like the little markets with the different goods. So you have this sort of extreme clash of scales, from the very, very intimate and the gigantic, from the historical to the contemporary. You even have like these decommissioned oil rigs as these like giant pieces of evidence of the heritage of the region. So in the middle of this neighborhood, almost as a test, we looked at picking two former warehouses that were currently empty and see if we could turn it into a cultural space for the contemporary life of Abu Dhabi. Like one of the beauties, a bit like our office in Copenhagen, a former factory, what you have is that you have large spans, you have tall ceiling heights, so you have an amazing freedom to work with. And we thought maybe one way to turn this into a cultural space, we thought about this idea of the sort of Islamic courtyard, the idea of the patio as this way of bringing light, air, water, nature into the heart of a building, as these like miniature oases in the middle of an otherwise rather hermetic architecture created to resist the heat. So we basically sort of took the basic outline of the two connected warehouses and sort of as a way of organizing the floor plan into different galleries, punched these little holes, different oases, that would then sort of create a sort of a rather free-flowing but still organized art gallery or sort of exhibition space within. The basic idea is that we sort of we wrap the entire building in a sort of perforated rusting steel skin out of core 10, sort of reminiscent of some of the sort of the ship hulls and some of the different elements of decommissioned pieces of shipping or oil industry that are sitting there and rusting on the site. And then this perforated skin also creates a veil that allows daylight and air to come into the exhibitions. We have these sort of industrial folding doors, similar to something you might find in a garage, that allows the building to open up and invite people to explore. Out of concrete, we're creating this plaza in front, like a paved plaza. Cracks in the concrete elements allows trees to grow and form benches. We're sort of within the pavement breaks up and incorporates all the necessary mechanical installations to sort of create a well-functioning exhibition space. So essentially, it's an extremely sort of a subtle arrival of culture, sort of nested into the iconography of the industrial heritage. It's the industrial pavement, it's the industrial barracks, but with a new sort of element. Inside, the primary organizing principle are the courtyards. And we were thinking, just like the Islamic courtyards paved with colorful tiles, it could be interesting to play with this idea of the courtyards as being fragments of color. So our first pass at it was trying to sort of take different artworks and create them out of ceramic tiles. So instead of being Islamic sort of mosaic patterns, they would be sort of contemporary art pieces, but created in a similar fashion. Then came the suggestion that perhaps it was like not so respectful to be walking on the art pieces, so we thought like maybe it could be like little souvenirs from the neighborhood, almost like fragments of the neighborhood turned into mosaic images on the ground. But again, that there was like maybe this concern that having too much expression in the courtyard might detract from the freedom of exhibiting things or sculptures in the courtyards. Then we came up with the idea that maybe it could be the purpose of the courtyard is actually to regulate the climate, to create a space that has air and light, but also shade. So today you can sort of simulate how a courtyard performs. And these are simulations, and you can see the red is where you get a lot of direct sunlight and where it gets warmer, and the blue is where you have more shade. So I thought maybe these like environmental simulations are almost like contemporary abstract artworks, and maybe they could be sort of interesting in as a backdrop, the sort of more hazy presence that is actually sort of almost like a reminder of the environmental performance of the courtyard as an Islamic invention. But still, like maybe it was too sort of too funky colors. So we kept looking. We thought maybe it could be, since the courtyard are like these concentrated pieces of nature, maybe we could sample different parts of the Abu Dhabi landscape and sort of create them into the courtyard. So each courtyard is not a piece of real landscape, but it's a piece of abstract landscape that created these like rather striking formations. But at the end, sort of the curators agreed that to be able to really use the courtyards also for putting sculptures and like various contemporary artworks, they really wanted something neutral. So we thought, okay, so let's really make it a landscape. So these sort of terracotta tiles, sort of condensed dried clay, and then maybe instead we could make them still this idea of the different landscapes of Abu Dhabi, but in this case, sort of in a sort of abstract interpretation. So together with our landscape architect at BIG, we sort of identified sort of a series of regional indigenous plants and have sort of designed a series of courtyards that in each their own way configure the way that people can interact, and also sort of create either like a small little grove, more like a savanna-esque landscape, and other places something more like a plantation or a piece of desert. And that's essentially where we are now. The project has been materializing over the last year and a half, and tonight is the official opening. And I think it has become like a very subtle. It's quite interesting when you when you move around out there. At first you might not notice, and then suddenly you see that one of the warehouses, although it definitely looks like it's definitely in the same family as its neighbors, but something different is going on. And I think it's a very, very promising experiment of a different take on urban development, where, you know, the Emirates could still be a place where the fantastical is possible, but maybe the fantastical in a natural extension of the existing heritage. We have this sort of notion of social infrastructure leads me to this large category. You can see that in our work, the public and the public life is a major part of what we do. But in one case, we actually almost surrendered the design to the public. We're doing a space in Copenhagen that consists of what we call the Red Square, the Black Market, and the Green Park. It's the home of the most ethnically diverse neighborhood in all of Denmark. You have more than 60 different nationalities. And we thought that to make this urban space successful, it needs to happen in a close dialogue with the local community. So we reached out to the local community and asked people to recommend elements from their other home country. So as an idea, we have a Moroccan fountain. And it's not to be nice to the Moroccans, but because the Moroccans have an amazing heritage of architectural water features, and it's now like this incredibly popular paddle pond in Copenhagen. We have a Jamaican sound system where with your iPhone you can plug in wirelessly and make outdoor concerts. The neighbors complain a lot, but it actually shuts off at 9 p.m., so it is completely within the limits of the law. There's a Thai boxing arena from Thailand, Iraqi swings, litter boxes from Great Britain, bollards from Ghana, bicycle racks from Finland. You have a sign on the Red Square, which is a sign from the Red Square in Cyrillic letters. We have a Kazakhstan bus stop, way more imaginative than a typical Danish one. We found palm trees in China that actually naturally grow in a Danish climate. The octopus from Japan is a nice reminder of the sort of amazing capacity for play to go across languages and cultures. And when you look at the benches, it becomes like a cultural study. An S-curved love seat from Mexico, where you're looking the person you're sitting next to into the eyes. A Belgian bench where everybody looks away from each other. And also you have, as part of the lamps, you actually have neon signs that advertise things you can't buy in Denmark. So this is a Qatari dentist and some different things from former socialist countries. And we've created an app together with Superflex and Topotec Eins artists and landscape architects, so that people can learn the story behind the different objects. And this idea of radical crowdsourcing suddenly became very useful. 3 years ago, you will remember that New York got hit by Hurricane Sandy, turning off the lights in most of downtown Manhattan. According to a local cartoonist, it gave rise to a new neighborhood, Sopo, south of Power. And the basic science is that because of rising temperatures, wind speeds are accelerating, and the Atlantic hurricane belt is expanding to the north, and suddenly the region of the northeast coast of the United States is being hit more frequently than ever before by stronger and stronger storms. Because of the funnel shape of the New York Bight, 50% of the most densely populated city on the East Coast is currently at risk. And we got sort of invited to see, can we look at creating the necessary flood protection, 12 miles of contiguous waterfront, without building a seawall that segregates the life of the city from the water around it. And we got inspired by the High Line in New York. The High Line is one of the most popular new promenades, but it used to be train tracks, elevated train tracks. It's basically a piece of decommissioned infrastructure with public and environmental programs on top. So we thought, what if we don't have to wait until the infrastructure gets decommissioned? What if we can design the necessary infrastructure for resiliency so that it comes with positive programs for the people? If you look at the city of New York, it has very much been shaped in recent history by the clash of these two giants. On one hand, you have Robert Moses, also known as the power broker. He made all the necessary public projects, the highways, the social housing of New York, often with devastating impact on the local community. At some point, he tried to run the Trans-Manhattan Highway through Greenwich Village, and he encountered resistance from Jane Jacobs, who rallied the local grassroots and in a sort of David Goliath moment, defeated the plans and saved the village. We thought, to make the dry line successful, as we call this project, it needs to be conceived almost as a love child of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. Because on one hand, to resist an incoming flood, we need a top-down, holistic, 12-mile, consistent piece of waterfront protection. But to make it socially successful, it needs to happen in a close dialogue with the local communities. So we proposed to reach out to all of the representatives of NGOs, foundations, community boards, of all the communities inhabiting the waterfront of Manhattan. And then together with them, we took the necessary engineering and shaped it in a way that would fit with their needs and their desires. So I'd like to show you a short film that we made where you can see the people from the community we worked with, their experience from Sandy, their dreams and concerns for the future, and how it's going to look like when we break ground in 2017.
That was actually why Sandy was so bad, is because of the phase of the moon, it was already a very large high tide, as well as the storm surge coming in with the wind and the tide lining up perfectly to give us 14-foot tides instead of 8-foot.
The most shocking part of Hurricane Sandy was the fact that it exceeded expectations.
I think the sheer magnitude of it caught a lot of people off guard.
When Hurricane Sandy came, we were not prepared at all. I mean, not even the slightest.
Yeah, it was like an alien invasion of water. And not the good kind of water.
So yeah, I mean, it came right in front where there was literally boats on 14th Street floating in front of our window.
We had a sub-basement level office a block from here, and it was totally covered in water for 2 days, so we lost everything. Everything.
We're really concerned about another storm and the flooding that's possible, and we think that the next time it's going to come even further inland.
I'd like to see some type of flood protection in this area. That's going to happen. We're vulnerable, obviously, being close to the water.
Something that just brings like more walks, different walks of life, you know, another escape from just the busyness and the hustle and bustle.
There's this great space that could really become community space, cultural space, and active uses.
space. And in New York and other congested cities, it's hard to come by.
Anything that makes the cities greener is just such a wonderful thing for not only the environment, but the people that live in the city too, to be able to be around that space.
The plans, the berming, the sense of how it can become into the natural landscape itself, how we want to program that is really the next challenge. We are the link, we're the tip in the sense of the big U. It's important that the entire waterfront of Lower Manhattan build in the plans that have been put forward, because we can not only fortify this great city of New York, but be a model for cities all over the world.
So, and that is basically this sort of notion of social infrastructure. I think, to leave you with a final example that is a little bit further ahead than the dry line. The dry line is scheduled to break ground on the East River portion in 17. We're currently building what might be the new landmark of Copenhagen on the waterfront, but it's not a royal palace and it's not a cultural palace. It's going to be a power plant that turns household waste into electricity and heating. Together with the citizens of Copenhagen, all of their trash comes back as power. If you look at trash as a resource, 1 ton of trash equals 1 2/3 of an oil barrel. These power plants operate on an economy of scale, so they're like very big, blocky buildings that cast shadows on the neighbors and block the views. It's going to be the tallest and biggest building in Copenhagen. It's going to be right next to the Copenhagen Marina, and it's going to be right where the locals go water skiing. So we thought, like, how can we turn this into an asset for the community and not just a big eyesore? And speaking of water skiing and skiing, Danes love to ski. We have snow, but we have absolutely no mountains. But we do apparently have mountains of trash. We have to go 6 hours by car to get to Isaberg in the south of Sweden. Because of the size of the power plant, we can do 2/3 of Isaberg simply by following the different sizes of the machines that go inside. We can design the power plant with the sloping roof, complete with, pine trees and hiking paths, ski lifts, and sort of insanely, we won the competition with this idea, and suddenly we had to figure out how to deliver. To give you an idea of the size, it's twice the length of an Olympic half pipe. So it's a pretty significant slope. You might have noticed that Denmark won 0 medals in Sochi. We hope to change that, because now we can actually practice at home from 2017. And for those who don't ski, there's also like a hiking path. You can picnic, you can enjoy the spectacular views of the otherwise horizontal city of Copenhagen. We're going to have the tallest climbing wall in the world, 100 meters of danger. And basically, you can say that this diagram I showed you in the beginning, this sort of a fantasy or mission about trying to design cities and buildings as ecosystems, is very close to being complete here, because not only do we harvest local resources, daylight, air flows, rainwater, and together with the citizens of Copenhagen, it actually forms a metabolism that converts waste to resource. The reason we could win the competition is because it is the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. The smoke that comes out of the chimney is completely non-toxic, but it still contains a little bit of steam and a little bit of CO2. But that means that where you would normally want to be as far away as possible from a power plant, here you actually have clean mountain air literally on the roof of it, and that's why it can be a public park. So to take this idea, and that's why the CEO of the company said that this idea makes what's invisible about my technology, but the most amazing thing, makes it blatantly visible, that everybody can see something different is going on here. And to take this transformation of the public perception of a power plant to the extreme, we designed the chimney in such a way that at regular intervals, it puffs gigantic smoke rings, or basically like rings of steam. And the idea is that every time this power plant has saved the emission of 1 ton of CO2, we celebrate it by puffing a ring of steam. So where the chimney used to be a symbol of something that was a problem, pollution, now it becomes a celebration of something playful. Again, the problem is when you propose these things and you win and you have to deliver them, you look up into the yellow pages and there are no giant smoke ring emitting contractors in the phone book. So together with Realities United out of Berlin, Danish Technical University, and a guy called Rocket Madsen, who essentially does do-it-yourself space rockets in something that looks like a bicycle repair shop. We've made these prototypes, and we've made a handful, but like this summer, something happened.
Hvor er det vigtigt! Hvor er det vigtigt!
So what I like about this idea of the smoke ring is that even though it seems like a silly thing to spend time on, and we have spent a lot of time on it, I think it's a nice symbol of one of the core aspects of architecture, which is basically that at its core, architecture is sort of the art and science of turning fiction into fact. That we sit in our studio and we brainstorm these wild ideas, and it's purely like a figment of our imagination. And then through sort of hard work and like applying for all the permits and solving all the technical projects and securing all the funds, after 5 or 10 years, suddenly what used to be like pure fiction becomes like concrete reality. It really becomes part of the world we live in. And this world-changing aspect means that in 2017, if someone from Abu Dhabi would travel around Europe, they might come back and explain, oh, you know, like Europe is pretty nice. Like in Venice, you know, the streets are paved with water. They sail with gondolas through it. It's pretty nice. And in Denmark, you know, they ski on their power plants that turn their waste into electricity, and where the chimneys puff giant smoke rings. And that's just how it is in Denmark. And I think sort of, so it is really a world-changing aspect that pure fiction becomes hard fact. And I think therefore also, like, whenever we are asked to intervene in a neighborhood, no matter where it is, if it's in the fish market or if it's in the port of Copenhagen, not only do we have the possibility, we actually have the responsibility to make our world a little bit more like our dreams. So on that note,